Hello, Tom Maguire. I've got a fantastic book to review for you today called Walking in Wonder, Eternal Wisdom for a Modern World. This is John O'Donohue. John O'Donohue was an Irish poet. He's done a few books. I'm going to be looking at some more of his stuff for sure. He died very young. He was 52. He apparently died very suddenly in his sleep. Which is pretty sad. This book is kind of a mix of some of his kind of conversations and exchanges and writings and different things, radio interviews, all kind of put together sort of after he died. So it spans a number of years, some of the stuff that he's done. He talks about such themes as imagination, landscape, the medieval mystic Meister Eckhart, and I thought he was talking about Eckhart Tolle to begin with, so I felt very stupid when I realised that it wasn't that at all. I'd never heard of Meister Eckhart before, but that's someone who's worth looking up for sure. And he talks about aging and death. So there's nothing really massively original. He was a philosopher, and there isn't anything in here that's massively kind of original necessarily, but it's really nicely written. It's really his kind of thoughts and poetry just feels lovely to kind of take in. He's got his own style. Walking in Wonder is considered to be kind of a tribute to John O'Donohue. So he was a much loved author. It draws on the philosophies of Hegel. He talks about choice, and this really interests me. He says that choice is always loss. And I was listening to the great philosopher Grant Cardone just recently. Anyone who kind of is really into personal development and success and stuff will know Grant Cardone. He does lots of YouTube videos. Not exactly the sort of bloke you'd think of when you think of John O'Donohue necessarily. You wouldn't really put the two together, but he did quite a good video actually not long ago. It's probably about 10-15 minutes long, where he's talking about the importance of sacrifice. And John Peterson talks about this really well in some of his lectures and stuff as well. But he talks about sacrifice, and he's talking about how if you want to be successful, if you want to make it, then you have to be prepared to leave where you are to get to the next place. You can't just hold on to everything. You have to make space for more things. You have to clean out your mind in order to get newer stuff in and change and move forward. And Grant Cardone just illustrated it quite nicely in his own sort of cheesy Texan kind of billionaire kind of way. But it was well done. It kind of got me thinking, and he's talking about the sacrifices he's made in terms of girlfriends that he's had in the past who he's had to let go of, who he had fantastic chemistry with, but they weren't good for him in the right way. Properties that he would go and happily go and live back there now because he had such good memories and such good times there, but he had to let them go and move on. Different things. And, you might say, the billionaire or the multi-millionaire having to give these luxuries up, big deal. Well, actually, money doesn't necessarily make you completely happy. And, that idea of sacrifice, we do have to sacrifice the present to a certain extent to make a better future. And John O'Donohue kind of touches on that. And he says you have to choose one thing over many others quite often. And he says that the soul can kind of struggle with this. It's hard to let go of things. I have to leave here to get there is what he says. And I like that. I also like the fact he says that life isn't necessarily a journey. We talk about this journey the whole time, and I talk about that a lot. I say that you need to love the journey, to love the process, and you do, but he kind of takes it one step further than that and says that it isn't necessarily a journey. It's about finding your rhythm, and when you find your rhythm, you'll find that things just flow and they're just easier. And by that, I kind of took that, you kind of take the highs with the lows, a little bit like the kind of catastrophe of life in Zorba the Greek, where you're kind of accepting that life has its ups and downs, it has its tragedies, its catastrophes, its kind of difficulties, but you try and drink that all in and accept it and enjoy it and make the best of it, and kind of that's how to be resilient, that's how to appreciate things. So it's about getting into that rhythm. You have your rhythm, you have your I don't know, he just puts it in a much better way than I ever could. He talks about Rupert Sheldrake as well, who was someone I hadn't heard about before until I'd read the book by his son. I can't remember his name now, but it's the one about fungus. I can't remember. I'll edit it in. I read that just recently and reviewed it. And that's a very interesting book, talking about fungus and how long fungus has been around for and psychedelics and thing. I realised when I did a bit of research on him that his dad, Rupert Sheldrake, is a bit of a kind of off-the-wall scientist who's come out with some different things that other scientists haven't necessarily agreed with. So he talks about him, which I thought was interesting, and he said that Rupert Sheldrake that tourists should become pilgrims because in Ireland they're at risk of being completely overrun by tourists. I quite like that, and that's the same for us down in Cornwall. That's how I see it down here. He talks about magic and loss, and he mentions Lou Reed, and he says how that silence can be really kind of telling and significant, and some of Lou Reed's music is a really good example of using silence and using gaps. He says that he quotes Moriarty and says that time is eternity, living dangerously. And I really like that. It just kind of gets you thinking. Time is eternity, living dangerously. Yeah, I like that. He talks about the importance of good conversation. He says, when was the last time you had a good conversation with somebody? And that good conversations are kind of one of the things that make life worth living. Actually, just being able to have that discourse between two people, actually kind of getting to the root of things and just enjoying things, playing with things. He says to record the phrases of children because it gives the idea of the past world that they have within them, this idea that we've come from this past world. This is something that Greek philosophers used to talk about, that actually we're born with our experience already, and then as we grow we kind of slowly get to bring it back to our memory. So it's this idea that the kids have come from another world into our dimension, and they'll come out of these funny phrases and use of words that to us sound a bit silly, but is actually kind of them possibly bringing it from another dimension. Again, you might find that a bit silly, but I thought that was lovely. The concept of the soul being everywhere, and this idea that when people die, that their soul is everywhere around us, that the soul isn't something that necessarily kind of disappears or departs from the body, and it's more like that the soul has a body rather than the other way around. And different people, different philosophers have talked about this before, but I really quite like it. It just gets you thinking, doesn't it? I think when we think within our own limitations and within particularly the limitations of our culture and the things we're told as we're brought up, that we find it very difficult, don't we? And if you can just kind of expand your mind and kind of think of things differently, then that can be quite a good exercise in itself, whether you believe in something beyond where we are or not. I think it's a good thing to think about and ponder. I'm just going to read a quote from the book, which I particularly like. He says towards the end that, if my own death were to occur tomorrow, what would be the peaks of my existence, the faces of my beloved and of others I love and those who love me, the dark valleys of devastation, mountains, the ocean, the numinous music of words, the endless festival of the senses, the excitement and beauty of woman, the joy of music, memories of hard but satisfying days and of work on the bog, in the meadows, building walls, conversations that will sing in the mind the harp, cello of the Irish language, the Eucharist, and the celebration of the body in love, being listened to when words were frail and suffering was sore, the return of the swallows to the shed, my uncle's companionship, my father's mystical sense, and my mother's love and trust in my being. And there are absolutely loads of quotes in his stuff that I just think are fantastic, but I just love it. It's so poetic, it's so nicely written, it's just so full of imagery. And this is actually a book that I've got on audio as well. It's absolutely fantastic on audio. The guy who reads it out, I think it's Pat Donohue, his brother, such a lovely voice, proper Irish old man. Now, I like an Irish accent anyway, but I think an old man with an Irish accent is just better. Again, my granddad, well, both my grandparents were Irish, but I remember my granddad's old sort of Irish accent, and my late father-in-law passed a few years ago, very Irish as well, and I really like that old kind of old man Irish accent. I think is fantastic. So I just listen to that sometimes at night, maybe listen to the last half hour, and just poetic and philosophical and inspiring and just relaxing and just lovely. It's a really nice book, really highly recommend it. I would definitely recommend buying the hard copy because it's just really nicely set out, easy short sort of chapters. I suppose it's his writings, isn't it, from different things, so just put together a bit like that, which makes it quite easy just to pick up and look at and kind of skip between for different bits, which I like. But also the audiobook is kind of a bit like that, I suppose. The audiobook isn't set out with the names of the chapters, but there is a PDF that you can download with it as well, which is really nice. I prefer it when you get the names of the chapters on Audible, I must admit, but it's not the end of the world. But the audiobook is nice as well because, like I say, it's narrated by his brother and he's just got a fantastic voice. It's just really nice. So this is a brilliant book. I absolutely love it, really rate it. I've had the privilege of reading some fantastic and listening to some fantastic books recently, and this year I've read and listened to some brilliant ones, but this is definitely one that's up there. So highly recommend it. Fantastic book. Please keep liking and subscribing, and I'll speak again very soon. Cheers.